Welcome back to our show. I'm Alexa, your netball bestie, and together with Jenna, this is your netball besties. This is where we deep dive into SSN game analysis and what the netball world is currently talking about. We are well and truly at the pointy end of the season. We had only two games on Sunday, being the minor semi in Adelaide between the T-Birds and Vixens, and then the major semi here in Perth between Fever and Swifts. Both games were huge, but in very, very different ways. And we cannot wait to get into the details of what happened. Don't forget to hit that follow button and please leave us a 5-star rating if you enjoy this episode. Please also give us your honest feedback on how you found the show and what you've liked, what you haven't, what you'd like us to add or remove as we head into the international games later this year. We want to make sure that we're creating a show that is what you guys want to listen to, so we can keep improving and growing. First, we're going to touch on a few major talking points and then get straight into our game analysis deep dive. Jenna, can you please break down the games and the scores for us?
Yep, so the first game we had was the minor semi between Vixens and Thunderbirds, and the Vixens took the win 58-56. And then we had the major semi between Fever and Swifts, and Fever took the win in, once again, another dominant performance, 77-45.
Definitely a dominant performance, and we have a lot to talk about the games, so let's get into it. But first, before we jump into our game analysis, let's quickly touch on some major news from the week. And of course, that is the Giants. And of course, that is Julie Fitzgerald officially retiring from her head coach position at the Giants after what can only be described as the best netball coaching career ever. So that leaves officially two head coach positions up for grabs in SSN at the moment. Of course, we have the Vixens head coach position, which I'm assuming people have been applying for a few months now. And then now the Giants head coach position. And with all of the changes that are currently going to be happening around the Giants. I guess we're yet to see what's going to happen, but I'm sure we're going to see a few more headlines coming from Giants camp in the next coming weeks. Let's quickly touch on Diamond's selection that was officially announced a few days ago as well. And, there were definitely, most of the list was not a surprise. They are our best players. They've been in Diamonds for a few years now, and most of them are continuing to play, in top form, particularly all of our middies and our defenders have all had really, really stellar seasons for 2025. So none of that was a real surprise. Did you have any major takeaways from the Diamonds list, Jenna?
No, it was pretty much, I think it was what was to be expected. I was just very glad that Alice finally got the recognition that she has absolutely deserved, because she has been the most consistent mid-quarter this whole season. And I'm so glad that she's finally getting recognition for that.
Absolutely. No, very, very well deserved from Alice, and very excited for her because, of course, we are Fever girls and we love to see, another Fever amongst the Diamond squad. We do, of course, have to touch on the fact that there are a few injured players in the announced squad. And of course, we have to remember this is not just a 2025 list. This is also for 2026. So the players that are currently injured will not be injured going into the 2026 competition. So that is something to keep in mind, because I know there was a lot of confusion going on in, online in socials in regards to particularly players like Courtney Bruce or, just players who are currently injured. But I think that this is a positive sign. It is a sign that the coaching staff are expecting her and the other players to make a full recovery. So the only things of real note that, we took from this announcement was obviously Donnell Wallen being one of the players who has, is still included in the overall list and the squad, but was moved into an invitee position, which, if we're being completely honest, makes perfect sense in regards to the fact that she hasn't been playing in SSN this year. She's currently playing in the New Zealand League and she is doing really, really well. So it wouldn't have made sense to remove her altogether. She is a Diamonds player in the past. She has, participated and been part of winning games for the Diamonds. So it makes sense that she's in the list. And it does also make sense that she is in the invitee category at the moment, just based on the fact that she isn't currently playing in Australia. And I guess the other big notable out is, of course, Rudy Ellis. This was a really, really unfortunate, a loss to the Diamonds list for sure. There are a lot of fans that were really disappointed not to see her in that list. I'm sure the coaching team have their reasons. I know that there's been a lot of analysis in regards to people putting together spreadsheets online, calculating the defenders and what their net points have been and what their participation and their stats have been throughout the season. Perhaps that's something that, led into this decision. But we also have, of course, Tegan O'Shannessy, who is currently injured, but she has been named as an invitee and also very, very well deserved after the season she's had. And also notable that Erin O'Brien, who we have just talked so much about this whole season, Jenna, how much we have absolutely been obsessed with her season and how much she's grown. She is the injury invitee to replace Tegan O'Shannessy until she is recovered. So that is really exciting for her because I think that she's another one who is a definite Diamonds future. In regards to what I'd like to see out of the Diamonds this year, I touched on this on TikTok last week as well. And I really, really want to see Georgie on the court for Diamonds. I would love to see a change up in the combinations. Obviously, a lot of those combinations we know are tried and tested. They work well, but, we did have issues with our attacking end, particularly in the last Constellation Cup against New Zealand. And so I'd really love to see, Stacey and the coaching team take risks with that. Maybe start with Georgie and GA. I know she hasn't been listed as a shooter. This is just my fantasy land hope, but I would love to see Georgie and Liz on the court together. I've said to you before, Jenna, I think that Georgie just encapsulates the best of Liz Watson and Steph Fretwell in one person. When she plays WA, she plays like Liz Watson. When she plays GA, she plays like Steph Fretwell. I just really hope to see more of Georgie in a Diamonds dress and on the court this year. All right, let's get straight into the first game of Sunday, which was, of course, the minor semis, and that was in Adelaide, the Thunderbirds versus Vixens. So we actually went and saw this at Brewdog here in Perth. Which was really fun. There were heaps of Fever fans around because, of course, we just walked over to RAC Arena and went to the Fever game right after this one. The downsides were that the music was quite loud, so we didn't really get to absorb all of the commentary, and our kids were also there, so we were a little bit distracted. So because of that, I think I personally definitely lost a lot of what was going on in regards to the details. So I re-listened to the game this morning to kind of get more of an idea of what the commentators were seeing because I wasn't able to absorb as much information while watching it. And I'm so glad I did because there was definitely a lot that I missed. So we have a lot to talk about this game. I also did ask you guys who are currently in my game chat on Instagram whether you had any questions, and a lot of them were about this game. So we are going to answer those questions and talk about those topics that you are interested in hearing about. I know that the Thunderbirds are really, really disappointed in the fact that they have lost this game and their chances, at a three-peat. But I just want to remind you guys, this game was not a massive loss. It was actually a very tightly contested game. Every single quarter, there was only one or two in it. This was not a majorly, there were no huge mistakes. There were no huge areas. This was actually just a very tightly contested game by both teams. It's just something to keep in mind. Looking at the net points, it's very easy to see that Kira was the standout for this game. She had over 100 net points. She's definitely had one of her most consistent games. We've seen the Vixens attacking end really, be up and down in regards to how consistent that attacking end is. And this just happened to be a game that the girls were on. The biggest surprises for me were, of course, that Georgie was kept pretty quiet, and that is 100% credit to the work of Kate Eddy. She was doing such a fantastic job, and she definitely created the change that we saw from T-Birds at halftime, which was that Frew came off and Georgie was moved into the GA bib. Now, that, of course, moved Kayla into the WA bib. Kayla Graham, she's obviously one of the newer players for Thunderbirds, and that meant that Frew was kept off. We haven't seen Frew play WA before, so we haven't seen them be able to do that change. And Kayla had a really good game, but I must admit I was disappointed to not have Frew on the court for more. I actually think that she's one of their stronger players. And if given a chance, I think that she would have come back in the second half. The shooting circle in the super shot period really, really struggled with just having one super shot shooter. We've touched on before in regards to when that one time we saw a huge shock change, and that was the addition of Fru and Georgie in the circle together during the super shot period. This just happened to be the worst game to try this because this just happened to be the game that none of the shooters were doing well. All three of them that were tried at shooting, so Kayla, Fru, Georgie, all of them, they weren't shooting well that game. But I feel like this needs to be given another chance because this was definitely an opportunity where we would have, I think, seen a different result had we had two super shot options as opposed to Romelda Aiken obviously being right under the post, ready for the rebounds, and both defenders making Georgie work overtime. She was exhausted. There is only so much a GA can do in that position under that kind of pressure. And we saw even when Aiken did have the ball, she was just freely able to pass in and out back to the circle edge feeders to just try and reposition and essentially use up time, hoping that Georgie would find an opportunity to get free because both defenders were doing such a good job at shutting her down. They knew that the Thunderbirds were going to go for the twos, so they knew they didn't even have to worry about Aiken in that moment. So there was just nothing that the Thunderbirds attacking end could do in that moment other than pray that Georgie Horges was going to find her way out of that fight. You know, in most cases she did because she's bloody brilliant, but that is a hard job and a lot of pressure to continuously put on the shoulders of one player. I really think that they should have introduced the moving circle and given it another chance. I really, really think they should have. And in regards to risks, it's not like they're new to risks because they definitely decided to end this game on a risky choice, which was they had a young centre and they had Kayla in WA. They had a very young team on the court to finish this very tightly contested game, which was certainly a choice. Jenna, what were your takes on this game?
I definitely think going into this game, T-Birds were the tipped favourites to take this. You wouldn't have even thought it was a home crowd. There was just, it almost felt like for a team chasing a three-peat, there was no hunger. There was no fight. There were changes that needed to be happen. Like you said, I would have loved to actually seen the introduction of a moving circle because Aiken was missing shots under the post, not getting rebounds, and there was, as you said, a lot of pressure on Georgie. So I think having Fru coming in there, being a second option in super shot time, I think would have been great, especially considering Kira Austin was on her game and sinking super shot up super shot. I also thought this was definitely a very quiet defensive game from both sides, and especially from the Thunderbird side. By halftime, there was only 2 defensive gains for Thunderbirds and 4 for Vixens. This game for me was a game that was won on the attackers. This wasn't won in defense. Coming from a side like Thunderbirds, where Laddie Wilson is hitting her career best defensive game the week before, to now come into a game where she was completely quiet, it just seemed so uncharacteristic. And I thought as well, previously we've seen such a good matchup with Laddie on Sophie Garbin because of her ability to get in her head. The fact that this change wasn't made until almost the very end seemed like a real missed opportunity because I just don't think enough ball wasn't being won. There was not enough defensive pressure. Garbin was being given all the space in the world by Tilly. She needed someone that would be a bit more one-on-one, which we have seen work very well for Thunderbirds. Like even with Tanya, there just was just didn't feel like there was that hunger that like, we need to win, we need to make the changes, this is sort of makes me question, was there a bit of complacency? Were they sort of just expecting it to like go their way?
It's interesting you say that because something that you've mentioned a lot, Jenna, is how the Vixens seem to be one of the shooting ends that are most spooked by the Thunderbirds defenders, and that we've seen that time and time and again that they do not perform well against the Thunderbirds defenders. That has definitely changed. And I don't want to say it's because, Shamira wasn't there, because we've actually seen, Garrett and Wilson actually do a fairly good job throughout this season on Vixens themselves. So this was definitely, I think, a credit to the Vixens attacking end, for they've clearly been working on what hadn't been working and they adjusted. And they came through. Like clearly they were putting in the hard work. They figured out what they needed to do differently, and they were able to actually put out what they'd been told on the day. And this was the result.
Yeah, I think in this game, Vixens were able to just keep calm and composed and just do what they needed to do, right? And then when T-Birds would be almost pressured by themselves to fumble a ball or have a turnover, Vixens just thought, "Cool, let's keep our heads and get it done." So this is the consistent Vixens that we're used to seeing, and I feel like we're seeing teams right now, like the Swifts, for example, who started in such an incredible form and have really lost the form in the back end of the season. And then we're seeing teams like Vixens that have had a bit of a shakier season, but they're coming into form at the right time. So I think Vixens, they played the game, they played the long game, they did what they needed to do right, and that's inevitably what got them across the line. This is not the Thunderbirds that we're used to seeing, so it was a bit disappointing. And I think there was one moment where it was in the in towards the very end of the game where it really could have the Thunderbirds could have stole it back. I think Georgia was in position to take a super shot, but instead of taking the shot, she passed it off to Aiken, who sort of just fumbled it and then got called for what was it, a
Replay.
replay. And the ball got turned over and Kira Austin sunk it too, and it was all over. What really baffled me in this moment was for a team that is so seasoned in a finals campaign and have had really good success in high pressured moments, a lot of these decision making just didn't feel like that. I just wasn't very good decision making, but from such a seasoned side, you would have expected a bit more. And then I think as well, having the youngster rookies in the center and the wing attack in that dying minutes of the game where they could have very well stole that back, I just don't think that was the best call either. But I would almost think that T-Birds went into this game thinking, oh, we've got a second chance next week. It didn't feel like the do or die intensity. Kudos to Vixens, they kept calm, they kept composed, and they just got the job done.
I saw the snippet on Pivot when they had the press conference with the Vixens. Almost wouldn't have known they'd won the game. Like she looked so emotional and like tears in her eyes. And I can only imagine what a roller coaster this must be for her, knowing that this is her last season coaching the Vixens after so long. And particularly when that announcement was made, they weren't doing well. They weren't performing. And and then to see them now really rise to the occasion, turn their entire season around, be playing some of their best netball. I can only imagine how proud she must be of being able to finish on this kind of note, as opposed no matter what happens, like where the Vixens end up finishing, they must be so proud of what they've achieved given how they started. Speaking of the press conferences, actually, they also showed T-Bird's press conference with Georgie and Tanya. Again, that was really hard to watch, very emotional. Obviously, that was the end of their campaign, and they were very disappointed. And it's always hard seeing the players so upset. The press conference that was definitely the hardest to watch was the Swifts. Honestly, I feel like we don't give enough respect to the coach and the player that gets selected to face the media in that, directly after a massive loss, and having to keep that composure and answer those questions. Oh, I don't know if I could do it. I'm way too emotional. I'd just be crying. I know one of the questions that people wanted me to chat about, or us to chat about, was Romelda Aiken being called for a replay. This obviously was a bit confusing for a lot of people, but I just want to clarify, I'm not an umpire, neither of us are umpires, but from what we understand, the bouncing of the ball from one hand to the other does count as a replay in the rules. So I think that's essentially what happened. As far as we know, that was a correct call. All right, let's talk about the final game of the weekend, and this was obviously a huge game. So we had the undefeated Fever essentially winning this game and making it 13 undefeated games in a row, just literally breaking record after record. They are just absolutely in phenomenal form all across the court, all across the bench. It is just so impressive. Credit where credit is due. Fever are all performing fantastically at the moment. So the Swifts knew that they were going in for a hard fight. We had big outs. It was announced shortly before the game that Paige Hadley was not going to be in this game for, the very smart choice of the fact that they knew that they would have two chances. So they are saving Paige for the second game, which is going to be next weekend against the Vixens. So obviously, huge out for them. Paige Hadley has really, really steered the ship in Maddie Proud's absence. She has definitely taken that on and she has done a phenomenal job. Huge loss, huge loss. And we knew that they were going to feel that, particularly after how they performed against Firebirds without her. I think we were expecting them to really struggle a little bit in that mid-court attacking particularly. I think what we weren't expecting were quite so many fumbles from Grace. And I know statistically, someone put this up on the Netball Talk page, didn't they, where they broke down how Swift's defense have gone from the first half being the strongest defense to the second half being the weakest defense in regards to stats. So I thought that was such an interesting thing to point out. Looking at that and then seeing where I guess the most obvious mistakes get made when you're just a viewer, not looking at the stats week in and week out, is that you would think, okay, well, it's 100% the shooting end's fault. They're turning over too much ball. They're missing too many shots. And that is true. The responsibility is clearly being shared across the court in regards to what's been going wrong for Swifts. And it is at both ends of the court. And then obviously with the absence of Paige in the middle, a lot was working against them coming into this game. And it was hard to see so many fumbles from, I think, a team that started, obviously so strong. They were undefeated for a good run. And they were looking unbeatable at one point. It's just been really hard to see such a fall. Obviously, Fever did so well. It's kind of hard to say anything other than that. But yeah, Jenna, what were your thoughts?
Firstly, I do have some stats from Fox Netball for you. So the New South Wales Swifts, they copped the biggest margin of 32 goals loss, which is the highest score conceded at 77, and the highest scoring quarter, 26, in the Super Netball Finals history in their major semi loss against the West Coast Fever. And I feel like that does summarise it. But yeah, I think Grace was very visibly rattled. I don't think Dehaney had to do much at all. We saw a lot of her getting pinged for that push off, which at that point, I think, if the umpire is clearly in tune to that, maybe that's when, you take a minute to go, all right, let me just reposition, let me adjust. Or if there is something else happening, let me make sure I'm positioning myself so that it's being visible. Fever just started with a bang. And then it just built and it built and it built as a game one. The defensive pressure was absolutely next level. We saw Dan rotating the bench again, which we've been seeing all season, which I think has definitely paid off. I think it was just incredible the way that you could see someone like Katie Anderhaney come off and Fran Williams come into GK. And within, 15 seconds, she had already got a ball, gained ball. And that sort of seamless defense, I think Swifts just had no answers. There was nothing that they could combat that with. And I think that's just what's really setting Fever apart at the moment is everyone on court just does their job. They do their role and they do it well. There was that beautiful, absolute steal of an intercept from Alice Teague-Neal. It was definitely a hard watch, especially, I'm sure, for those Swifts fans. Like you said in the press conference, that was a hard watch too. But I think Bryony was very, very open in saying that we need to get over it. We need to do better, So I think taking accountability is the first step. I mean, even with Helen Housby and Sophie Fawns coming on for the moving circles, thinking super shots, it just wasn't enough at that point.
Let's have a look. I'm looking at champion data at the moment, and I just want to, I guess, give some positive news to Swifts fans. And that is they actually did well in the second half. So if we're looking at a quarter by quarter score, the first quarter, the Fever won 20-11. And the second quarter, they won 26-9. So this is definitely the half that lost the entire game for Swifts. Now, whatever was said at halftime in Swifts camp definitely had the desired effect, because if we look at how they finished the game, it was very, very different. The third quarter, it was 17-15. So they actually only lost that quarter by 2 goals. And the fourth quarter was 14-10. So they only lost the fourth quarter by 4 goals. Now, there are obviously some reasons behind this, and I wanted to touch on that as well. So in regards to changes that happened on both ends. So obviously Swifts came on. We had moments where there was a moving circle where Grace was on the bench, and I think that worked really well for Swifts. They had a lot more options there. But what I think was obviously a change that Fever made that was also part of this was we did see Beckford come off and Liv Wilkinson come on. And, Liv Wilkinson is a player that, has a lot of potential and a lot of promise. And clearly Dan believes in her and the team believes in her. It is worth noting that she did finish the game on negative 27 net points. So I think that's just worth noting in regards to perhaps why we saw a little bit of a change in the Fever dominance in the third and the fourth quarter. Whereas, Shanice Beckford finished her half on 66 net points. So it's just something worth noting. But, I'm sure that we're going to see a lot bigger things from Liv Wilkinson. I believe she's been selected in, the Youth Diamonds team. So, she's going to get a lot more experience and, it's only up from here. But overall, the team is just so dominant across the board.
Yeah, I think at the halftime break, the score was 46-20. Fever was sitting at 94% shooting accuracy, 9 gains to Swift's 1. 89% goals from games to Swift's 0%. 5 general play turnovers to Swift's 14. Things like that. And the team as a whole were only sitting on 29 net points as opposed to Fever's 342. And then Swift's finished the game as a collective on 101 net points as opposed to Fever's 535.
Those net point totals are really hard to look at.
And it is hard because you don't want blowout games like that. You want at this level, we want close games. We want competitive games. And whether you're on the winning or losing side, you don't want to see a team hit like that hard, especially in a finals campaign. I'm very curious to see now how Swifts bounce back from this and how they come into the game next week against Vixens.
Well, it's interesting because I think at the moment, Vixens fans are feeling very confident, obviously given, this performance. But I do want to point out that Swifts did kind of get their shit together in the second half. They just were that bad in the first half that they weren't able to ever recover from that. But, Vixens fans shouldn't feel too comfortable because if we look across the whole season or even particularly the second half of this season, both Swifts and Vixens are teams that have been very inconsistent across the board. They have had either really good games or really bad games. So I would say both teams are actually still on par and anything can happen.
Yes, which I think we'll actually probably will see a similar game that we've just seen against T-Birds and Vixens. Like those 3 teams feel very on level and Fever just feels like they're on their own thing at the moment. Vixens will have probably, they'll have that fire in them because if they win the prelim, that's a home grand final. Who wouldn't want to play for that?
What Swifts need to do going forward into this next game is obviously have Paige Hadley on the court. I think that is step one. They obviously still are missing Tegan O'Shannessy as that incredible impact player to have on the bench to come on for them. And obviously they're also feeling that loss and you can really see it. I think Grace needs, a little bit of a confidence boost. I think the fact that she's had quite a few fumbles in the last half of this season after starting so strong, I think perhaps put her in a false sense of security. And then the second half of the season has been probably a bit of a shock to the system when you realize what it's like when the defenders figure you out a bit and put you under that pressure and how everything has changed for her at the moment. We're seeing her go from absolutely dominating to, what we saw against the Fevers. I'm really hoping that she does just builds on her confidence after that. I hope she doesn't let this affect her because this is all just a learning experience for her as well. She still has her entire career to go. It's her first season in SSN. And, she came here to learn. She came here to be pushed to be better. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen.
I really hope that as well. I think if she can just, go back to get a bit of her confidence back herself a bit. I think it's a whole mindset change I think needs to happen because I think it's hard to not be critical on yourself, especially when like other people are being critical on you or when the bar, I feel like as well, going into the season, maybe unintentionally, a lot of the fans raised the bar very high for her. And so she thought, oh, okay, well, I need to be obviously here. And so, of course, when she's falling short, she's probably the first person in her head going, oh, which was it the off the court interview she did with Kath Cox? She even said her biggest weakness is that she's very mentally tough on herself. And I think that's what we're seeing. But as you said, this is the beginning of her career. And, this is probably the first time she's really feeling challenged. And If she can, build on this and pull herself out of it and build the confidence, she'll be better for it in the long run. Looking forward to seeing what she does next. Take it on board, and you are still an incredible player.
And take inspiration from other players who have had this happen to them. I mean, perfect example that comes to mind is Cara Conan. She had a really hard season last year, and even her first couple of games of this season were not her best. And then look at her now. She is arguably the most consistent shooter for like
Yeah.
Australian players. She is what a turnaround. She's her confidence. She's a perfect example of when a player is going through, not their best season, not their best moments, and how you can absolutely turn that around. And yeah, I really, really hope that we see that from Grace. I did see one comment that I thought was interesting, and someone wrote that they're getting a bit bored of seeing the same team win time and time again. Like, oh, how boring, no one's beating Fever. And I just want to point out, no one was saying that in Australia when Australia was winning every single international game. And I'm sure all the other countries thought it was boring that Australia was winning, but we weren't going to get worse. We were only going to keep getting better. At the end of the day, when you are undefeated and you are playing at the top of your game, you've just raised the bar. It's not up to the strongest team to lower the bar to make it easier for everybody else. They've set the bar, they've shown what's possible. It's everyone else's responsibility to raise their game and meet them there and challenge them there. It might be boring to see the same team win again and again, but look at internationals now. That has changed. Australia does not win everything. We are challenged at every single competition. And how great is that? We are seeing new talent be born. We are seeing phenomenal play across the world, and that is only a good thing. And the same thing for SSN is that, yes, Fever are clearly the dominant team. They, at the moment, don't look like they have any weaknesses. Everyone else just needs to meet them there, and hopefully that's what happens next year.
I agree with that. And also, if someone's calling you boring, I think if anything, that's a compliment. That means you're making it look easy, even though it's not easy in the slightest. I think different teams peak at different times. We saw Fever. How long did it take Fever to even win their first premiership in 2022? And then even they weren't able to back that up in the following 2 years, and they lost their prelim finals by 1 goal each. The dominant team for the past 2 years has been the Thunderbirds.
The interesting thing as well is amongst all this criticism, and I guess, people not giving credit where credit is due, is that the Fever lineup is not that changed from last year. No real changes to the Fever lineup as we saw last year. And even the year prior, there's only been like one difference in their starting seven, and that was Sasha Glasgow. If it was so true that, it's all about Janelle, or, that they're nothing without Janelle, then we would have seen Fever be undefeated for the last 7 years.
Since her debut.
Exactly, since her debut. And that's not the case. It is a full team performance. And, that argument just needs to stop.
It's not just a matter of going out on court and playing well. So much, it's a mentality, it's the environment, it's your personal life. In different teams at different times have things going on. And then we've seen a drop in performance, and then we've seen things working really well, and we've seen a lift in performance. Like, it is just one of those things. And right now, in all honesty, Fever just have their shit together. The fact that the bar can continue to be raised like this is so good for the competition. It's what we want. And I'm sure the amount of teams this year that are going to get a good gutting, like Firebirds, probably Giants, and
Mavericks even.
And Mavericks, for all we know, Mavericks may absolutely have a killer signing period. And then they're next year's favourites. Like, you just never know in this sort of sport. Kudos to Dan and the environment he's created for the team.
100%, 100% respect to Dan and the environment that he's built there. Credit where credit is due. As we've said, he's done a phenomenal job.
And it's not even something that's happened overnight. It's something that Fever have probably been working towards for years now. And it's finally all that hard work, all those hard losses. Like, you learn more in your losses and when you're challenged. And like last year, Swifts didn't have the best season for pretty much the whole season, but look how strong they started this year. So It's just ebbs and flows.
That's it from us for another week. Please go and give us a 5-star rating on Spotify if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your netball besties. You can send us your feedback directly either on TikTok, Instagram, or even email. I'll put all the details in the show notes of this episode, but you, of course, can find us on social media as well. And we can't wait to hear from you and get your feedback on what you've thought about our show so far and what you think we can do to make it even better going into the international games. Have a great week, guys, and we will see you after the preliminary final between the Vixens and the Swifts.